All right, so Escape from New York, huh? You definitely went all out with these sources, articles, reviews, behind the scenes. Looks like we've got everything we need to really dig into this one.
It's a film that's ripe for a deep dive, that's for sure. What's interesting is how, looking back on it now, you can see how much it tapped into those anxieties people had about big cities, particularly back in the late 70s.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. The whole idea of Manhattan, walled off, turned into a maximum security prison. I mean, it's a pretty striking visual, right?
It really is, and it wasn't just some random sci-fi thing Carpenter threw in there, you
Yeah.
know? I mean, if you look at what inspired him, films like Taxi Driver, there was this real sense of grit, this darkness that was already present in how New York was being portrayed.
Right, right. So it's like he took those anxieties, those fears about urban decay, and just dialed it up to 11.
Exactly. Instead of just a bad neighborhood, it's like the whole island goes to hell. And by 1997, no less. I mean, talk about bleak.
And I think that bleakness, that almost hopeless feeling, is a big part of why the movie still resonates with people today.
Right.
It wasn't just trying to be a cool action flick, it had something deeper going on.
Totally. You got to remember the context, too. This was post-Watergate, post-Vietnam. There was this real sense of disillusionment with authority, with the government.
Yeah.
And that's baked into the film's DNA.
Yeah, you can really feel that distrust, that cynicism right from the get-go, right?
Yeah.
Even with the president himself, the guy who's supposed to be the symbol of hope. And
Yeah, and he turns around and sends this convicted criminal, Snake Plissken, on what's basically a suicide mission.
talk about a vote of no confidence. And then there's Snake himself. I mean, he's not exactly your typical action hero, is he? More like, yeah, I'll do it, but what's in it for me?
Exactly. He's a mercenary through and through. Not in it for the glory, not for some noble cause. It's pure survival. And honestly, in that world, maybe that makes him the sanest one of the bunch.
Oh, for sure. Like, the whole system's gone haywire, so why even bother playing by the rules? It's like he's saying, the world's gone mad, so I'm going to go mad right along with it, but on my own terms. I mean, that line when they tell him about the president being kidnapped, and he just goes, president of what? Come on, that's gold.
Classic Snake.
Yeah.
That one line just sums him up perfectly.
But it's not just him. I mean, the whole supporting cast is fantastic, too. You've got Donald Pleasance as the president, Isaac Hayes as the Duke. Oh, man, the Duke. What a character. This totally over-the-top crime lord, but then he's obsessed with bandstand boogie.
It's that wild mix of action, sci-fi, and almost black comedy that makes it work so well.
And the music. We can't forget the music. That Carpenter score is just iconic.
It's so distinctive, so effective at building that tension,
Yeah.
especially that eerie melody when Snake flies the glider into the city.
Oh, yeah. It's so creepy, but it works. You wouldn't think that kind of, I don't know, almost romantic music would fit in that moment, but somehow it does.
And that's the brilliance of Carpenter, right? He takes these totally different elements, these seemingly clashing things, the gritty realism, those over-the-top characters, the synth-heavy score, and he somehow makes it all gel.
It's true. It's like he created a world that feels both familiar and totally alien at the same time. Like you recognize the anxieties, those fears about where society could be headed, but he takes those ideas to a whole other level.
Oh, totally. And visually, too, it's so striking. We were talking about the music, but the way Carpenter uses lighting, or I guess the lack of lighting, it's masterful.
Oh, yeah. Like most of the film takes place at night, right? Shrouded in darkness.
Exactly. And it just adds to that whole sense of danger, of uncertainty. But it's not just about creating a certain mood, I think. The darkness, it also reflects the moral ambiguity of, well, everyone in that world. Like, it's hard to tell the good guys from the bad guys when everyone's operating in the shadows?
Yeah. That's a good point. It's like, who are you really rooting for in this mess? Which kind of brings us to the whole question of heroism in Escape from New York, right? Because Snake Plissken, he's not exactly Superman, is he?
Right. This was the era of the big action heroes, Stallone, Schwarzenegger, all muscle and one-liners. Snake, though, he's different. He's ruthless when he needs to be, morally ambiguous, even a little cold at times, like that scene where he just walks away from that woman being attacked by those crazies.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that scene always gets me. You'd think he'd, I don't know, at least try to intervene or something, but he just keeps walking.
It's shocking. But at the same time, it's kind of what makes him cool, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Nothing phases this guy.
Totally. He's seen it all, done it all, and he's not impressed by much.
And it's that detachment, that almost nihilistic outlook that makes him such a fascinating anti-hero. Because in a world where everything's gone wrong, where the system's broken beyond repair, Maybe cynicism is the only rational response.
It's like Carpenter saying, forget your traditional heroes. In this world, you're on your own. Look out for number one because no one else will.
Exactly. And that idea, that sense of self-reliance in the face of societal collapse, it really resonated with audiences back then. And honestly, I think it still resonates today. I mean, we might not be facing a walled-off Manhattan anytime soon, but we've certainly got our own anxieties about the future, about where things are headed.
No doubt about it. And so we get to that ending, and it's just classic escape from New York, right? Snake pulls off this insane rescue, saves the world from a potential war, and then he just tosses it all aside, swaps out the president's super important tape with Bandstand Boogie.
It's such a perfect ending. It's so Snake.
It really is. I mean, he could have walked away a hero, gotten a pardon, disappeared into the sunset, but instead he chooses anarchy. What do you make of that? What was Carpenter trying to say with that ending?
It's up for interpretation, of course, but I think it just underlines how this film refuses to give you those easy answers. Like Snake's middle finger to the president at the end, it's a middle finger to the whole system, to the very rules that are supposed to govern society. Like, he's not interested in saving anyone or playing by anyone else's rules. He's his own man, you know. He's going to do things his way, even if it means embracing a little chaos.
It's definitely a statement, that's for sure. So what do you think? Is Snake Plissken some kind of folk hero for, people who are just over it?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, he's not your classic hero, that's for sure. But there's something about that screw the system attitude, that lone wolf mentality. It's definitely appealing, even if you don't agree with all of his choices.
He just does what he wants, and somehow he pulls it off. You can't help but kind of root for the guy.
He's a survivor, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And in a weird way, he kind of represents that little bit of rebellion we all have in us, right? That urge to just shuck it all, break free from the rules.
Totally. And it's not just him. I mean, think about some of the other characters, like the Duke. He's introduced as this almost larger-than-life baddie, right?
Yeah.
Totally in control, ruling this prison city.
Right, but then you see that other side of him.
Yeah.
The showman, the music lover. He's surprisingly human, even kind of a weird father figure to the people within those walls.
Yeah, he's like a twisted reflection of the president, in a way. They're both clinging to power, but in totally different ways.
Absolutely. And it shows how the film is dealing with these power dynamics in a really nuanced way.
Yeah.
It's not as simple as good versus evil. Everyone's compromised. Everyone's making deals with the devil.
Yeah, no one's coming out of this with completely clean hands. Which I guess brings us back to why this film is still relevant today, right? It's been over 40 years, but it still feels strangely current.
Oh, totally. It's like Carpenter tapped into something timeless, Like he understood that fear, uncertainty, those things can push people to extremes. And even when everything seems like it's falling apart, there's that temptation to look for the easy answers, even if they come at a cost.
So what do you think? What does Escape from New York ultimately have to say about us, about what happens when the world as we know it starts to crumble?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It makes you think about what choices you'd make when the stakes are that high. Would you embrace the cynicism, the every man for himself mentality, or would you try to find another way?
Those are some heavy questions. It's definitely a film that stays with you, makes you look at things a little differently, exciting, thought-provoking, and yeah, just plain cool.
Absolutely. It's a classic for a reason. And it leaves us with that final lingering question. What would you do if you were in Snake Plissken's shoes?
That's something to think about. Well, this has been quite the deep dive, wouldn't you say? Thanks for joining us as we explored the world of Escape from New York. And until next time, keep watching those classic films.